Okay, so I'd like to welcome everybody to our webinar today. Continuity or Chaos: Is your business equipped to handle the complexity of a remote workforce? Thank you for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get started. So today what we anticipate to talk about is essentially remote workforce solutions, how your support team and team members in general are hopefully going to work during this time and in the future. Obviously, as we know, the world is changing. We're dealing with a global pandemic. So allow me to introduce myself. My name is Michael O'Hagan. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Webair. Webair is a managed cloud company specializing in offsite backups, disaster recovery, and cloud solutions. I've been the COO for just about 3 years with Webair, just under 7 at this point. I'll also be doing this webinar with our partner, Adam Jewell, IMSCAD. And Adam, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Michael. Nice to be here. Hi, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are. As Michael said, I'm Adam Jewell. I'm the founder CEO of IMSCAD and IMSCAD Cloud. We've been 8+ years now in the business of deploying and supporting desktop as a service, private, public cloud solutions for end user compute, basically. So we have a big support team that supports our customers, and we're based in the UK, but we have customers all over the world.
Great. Thanks, Adam. So everybody, just so you have a brief overview of the partnership that we have going on here, which we will get into further into this webinar. However, Webair and IMSCAD have partnered up to deliver VDI desktop solutions to our mutual customers. Reason being is Webair really specializes in offsite backups, disaster recovery, and cloud services, and IMS specializes in virtual desktop infrastructure, reaching the gamut of everything from Citrix to VMware VDI, Horizon, so on and so forth. So allow me to introduce Webair. Webair has been in business for over 2 decades at this point, just about 23 to 24 years. It's been some time. Webair traditionally started off as a web hosting provider, and as time has gone on, we've evolved into a managed cloud provider, operating in 8 different locations, which is Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, Montreal, London, Paris, Amsterdam, and Singapore. So really our core competencies, as I mentioned, is disaster recovery as a service, backups as a service, private cloud, virtual private cloud, storage solutions, going all the way from NFS, cloud storage, to S3 object storage, SAN storage, you name it, we have the type of storage in our data centers, and also co-location. We mix the breed of our services together with co-location customers. You know, we have an ecosystem of all these softwares and services that we can offer our co-location customers. So that's really our specialty. And as I mentioned, we partnered with IMSCAD to perform those services. So Adam, I'll let you go ahead and introduce IMS.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, as I said, guys, 8+ years in the business now of virtualization. And effectively, we started out as a business really focused on graphical applications. That was our core focus. So we are, you know, people like, if you imagine like companies like Autodesk, Adobe, various sort of graphical based applications and workflows. So you're talking like engineers, construction, that sort of those sort of spaces, manufacturing, and that was our sort of grounding. So we was kind of focused on that. So we sort of in some ways did it reverse. So we did all the hard stuff first. Got, you know, doing Citrix, VMware with these types of industries, you know, 5-6 years ago was a fairly tough job, you know, getting the performance. But you know, we learned by our mistakes, and we improved. And now, you know, the technology's really come on both in the cloud and in a kind of virtualization world, because obviously with this type of desktop as a service, you want to use virtualization to do it. And of course, you know, NVIDIA themselves, you know, really changed the game as far as how desktops can be delivered now, and the way your sort of visual performance can be improved. And of course, you know, desktop as a service now is a widely offered product around. There's lots of people doing it. More recently, people like Azure come out with Windows Virtual Desktops. It's that type of solution. You know, more and more, it's like, well, why would you want to manage your own desktops in your business? You know, and of course, with the COVID-19 situation, even more so, it's highlighted this issue. And of course, more and more people are looking now to maybe outsource that part of their IT infrastructure, because it does take certainly one person's job to do that, and managing multiple machines really these days, you know, you should be looking to look for more of a managed environment. As a business, we're 45 staff, so we're very engineer heavy, 30 engineers, all Citrix and VMware, have qualified. We have a global support team, so these guys work all around the clock. We've got probably, I'd say, 70% of our business is in the US. So one of the reasons we're with Webair is it came through connections through that, and obviously it's a great fit for us because we are deploying the support of their cracking infrastructure. So there is a great fit there because obviously when people are doing this, if they can't do it themselves or they don't want to do it themselves as a business, which they obviously can do, it's their right to do that. But obviously having a specialist do it, I think really gives you a much better fit solution. And really, the price point is really not too much of an issue generally. But there's so much out there, and this is the problem. And hopefully in this webinar, we can really boil down into some of the reasons and the things of why, hopefully I can explain to you why we think we've got the best fit here for you, because obviously, there's lots of different flavors, and it's very difficult sometimes which way to turn to which solutions are best for you as a business. And of course, workflows are really important in any business. So different workflows for different businesses. Most, normal office users can get by a standard Windows desktop. But obviously, you get into anything remotely graphical or high data requirement, you end up in a different space into the resource you need in your desktop. As a business, we've got contracts globally with those main providers down there. You can see. We've been around a long time, done a lot of testing with Autodesk, Intel, AMD particularly, and we're just used as a kind of go-to company for this type of technology. So Michael, yeah, that's us, and obviously as you can see by the picture, we're based in the UK. So another fantastic picture of Big Ben there for you.
Great, thanks, Adam. So let's go ahead and get into kind of coronavirus and what has transitioned during this time, what has been happening over time. So as we all know, the pandemic has had a massive impact on remote work. Not only has it just happened, but naturally it's interesting. If you actually look at statistics, companies have becoming more remote. Unfortunately, this event kind of forced everybody into it. And the value of that is making companies realize that maybe they don't need the office space as much as they needed. So as you see, according to Forbes, there's been a 159% increase in remote work from 2005 to 2017. Doesn't sound like a lot, but that's pretty significant, right? All these tools that we've started to get over the years, such as Slack and HipChat and Google Docs and Microsoft 365, it gave us the ability as companies to start really adopting a remote workforce. Other than that, nearly also 50% of employees are already working remotely. That's pretty significant. And that's, due to a multitude of things. Maybe companies are just expanding globally and they don't have the capacity to open up physical offices. But it really is the tools that we're using that give us the ability to feel like we're all in the office, but we're not. Just like this GoToWebinar presentation, right? In the past, generally, you would have to do something in person, pre-recorded, but hey, we're all here together, doing this together like we were on stage and presenting to you. And then nearly 50% of growth in remote workforce has happened in the US over the last 5 years. It's pretty significant, and I'm assuming it's going to begin to grow significantly over the next couple of years. Unfortunately, we're all pressed with this situation where most of us had to go work remotely. I know for Webair, almost all of our staff is remote with the exception of our data center team members that have to physically be in the office if equipment fails or so on and so forth. But otherwise, we've adopted a remote culture. It's really the first time in our 20-something years of business that we decided to really see if we can do this. And the exciting thing is we can. And we were set up very good to accomplish this for the reason that we've been using these tools such as Slack and Zoom and WebEx even when we were in the office. So we're very fortunate that we have the opportunity to work remote, and we might continue this trend even after the coronavirus hopefully subsides. So really at the end of the day, what are we here for? Well, we're here for to kind of bring to the front lines that not many companies were prepared for this. And maybe they weren't prepared for this for a multitude of reasons. Again, they didn't have the tools or the software available to work remote, or really the one is how are my team going to be able to access their applications and their systems and their tools when they're remote, right? It's a tricky thing to say. So many businesses at the end of the day during this pandemic were ill-equipped to handle a remote workforce. Many companies were forced to transition completely to remote workforce. Some of them didn't even have the opportunity to have some people in office or maybe even go to the office once or twice. They just had to completely shut down. And the predicted increase in remote work and telecommunication post-pandemic is going to be pretty significant. Because at the end of the day, I think a lot of companies, including ourselves, is we're realizing the productivity we're getting out of our staff and our team to work remotely has been pretty significant. Now, partially, maybe the increase in work time could be related to, unfortunately, not being able to do anything at the moment since we're all on lockdown, we can't go anywhere. But Webair has seen a 15% increase in our staff's productivity since working remote. Our team members are starting earlier, they're ending later, they're just getting more done. They might be taking a little less breaks during the day because they're at home, they're more comfortable. So it's a very interesting what we're seeing unfold from this entire pandemic. Remote strategies need to be implemented right away, right? This is something that can't wait. You know, there's companies that are suffering significantly because they're still not prepared. And using Webair and IMS to potentially support a remote workforce using our VDI infrastructure solutions could be a very great way to continue your team working remotely and potentially get more out of your team. So really, what is virtual desktop infrastructure, right? Some people don't know what that is. And it's interesting because a lot of times things get confused about virtual desktop infrastructure. Is it VMware? Is it Citrix? Is it Azure, AWS? Is it some other tool? VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure, essentially stands for any type of service that you can remotely log into a virtual environment. It doesn't matter if it's Citrix, it doesn't matter if it's VMware. And at the end of the day, a lot of those things, whatever virtualization tool you use for your virtual desktop, can be any platform that you really choose. Some of them have differences, their nuances, so on and so forth. And IMS and Webair is here to help you determine which would be best for your business. But what virtual desktop allows you to do is essentially imagine being able to take your computer wherever you are at any given time, but not have to take your computer. Sounds funny, right? Well, at the end of the day, what you do is you deploy a desktop in the cloud, and from just about anywhere, especially these days, it's become more common, you can access your desktop from an iPad, any type of tablet, Android, somebody else's desktop, as long as the computer is probably within the last, I would say, about 10 years and running some updated software. You can simply log into a URL from anybody's computer anywhere in the world and access your desktop just like you were at the office. All of your applications will be there. Everything will be just how you had it, even all the way down to your screensaver, and does not matter where you log in from. All your data is stored on that desktop. You can connect to applications and systems. We can connect your virtual desktop infrastructure to any servers that you might have already. Maybe we do it via IPsec tunnels. We do some direct connectivity to make sure that your virtual desktop can still access maybe some local applications that you have for running your business. So the other thing is really security around VDI infrastructure. Everybody's like, well, if my desktop's in the cloud, can somebody get my data? Can somebody access my data? Of course, just like anything can be compromised. There's nobody that's going to turn around and say that's not possible. But obviously, we make these things secure. We have these tools. We have the value of being able to provide you two-factor authentication, locking down your desktop maybe to Active Directory logins, you name it. There's tons of ways that we can lock it down. So we try to take the complexity out of all of that and handle as much as possible for you that we can. When we're deploying these solutions, we can absolutely connect to a native two-factor authentication tool. Maybe your business already uses Duo, maybe Microsoft Authentication, Google Auth, or you name a plethora of other authentication tools. We can absolutely integrate it with 2FA. So when you log into your desktop, you're granted with a two-factor. So if somebody else tries to log into your desktop, obviously they can't get in without it. Does VDI make sense for my company? So it definitely, it depends. You know, nobody's going to turn around and say VDI makes sense for everybody. If you're 1 to 2 employees, probably not. Maybe a desktop as a service will make sense, which is generally more of a shared infrastructure platform. VDI typically when people use that term in the tech field, generally means dedicated infrastructure, means you have your own infrastructure, you're the only one on that infrastructure, and then desktop as a service can generally kind of mingle into like that shared infrastructure. So does it make sense? It depends. You might be 5 or 10 employees, and having that VDI environment makes sense because you have more security. The biggest thing around virtual desktop infrastructure that everybody needs to think about is the security of the platform. Basically, if you don't have an idea on how it works, when you set up VDI, you're actually giving, and depending on the case on how you want to set it up, which is the recommended way, is not a dedicated desktop to people. When an employee logs in, actually a desktop spins up from a template, from an image that you provided, and then it mounts essentially the data that user is using. So let's say it's you have an employee 1, and they go to log in. That desktop's not dedicated to them. When they go to log in, that desktop starts up and it configures all of their preferences and everything, so that you're starting from a fresh slate. They're not able to install applications without somebody adding them as an administrator. They're not able to store things to maybe the desktop. And again, these things are all configurable. That doesn't mean it's not possible. If you want your employees to be able to save stuff to the desktop of the computer, they absolutely can. But generally for security, all of their data, their files, their documents, and everything like that is generally kept on a file share, so that when the desktop boots up, it's completely clean. You don't need to worry about viruses. You mitigate malware. That's the goal of virtual desktop, is both providing people access, data anywhere kind of idea where they can access all of their systems from anywhere, but also security and making sure that their desktop is always clean. You don't need to worry about managing 18 different employees' computers and laptops, making sure that they're updated, because all of that happens in the virtual desktop environment, where you can update Windows in the virtual desktop environment. You can patch the one image. That image then deploys to everybody else. If you now need to go ahead and provide a new application, let's say you're now using, let's use Slack, for instance. Webair uses Slack for our communication. Now you want to make sure Slack is on everybody's desktop. You add that to the golden image, you redeploy it to everybody, and now when everybody logs in, they'll have Slack on their computer. One desktop to update, one place to push updates, makes things from a control standpoint much easier. So what if I work with a provider? How much time will it take to deploy the system, and will it burden my technical team? The goal, obviously, for working with somebody like Webair and IMSCAD is we take all of that stress off of you. Webair, from the infrastructure management standpoint, we deploy everything from the firewall to the network to the VMware environment. We get everything up and running. We're the one that monitor it, we patch it, we ensure VMware is up to date. And IMSCAD comes in, and they're the ones that help us actually deploy the VDI infrastructure. We want to work with best in breed companies to make sure we're deploying the best solutions for our mutual customers. So Webair ensures the infrastructure is reliable. IMS is handling the day-to-day of the deployment of virtual desktop, whether that's Citrix, VMware Horizon, obviously depends. And the burden, hopefully should be pretty minimal. Yeah, there's definitely some things we might need, depending on your organization. You might want to provide us the golden image, and that's okay. If you want to provide us the golden image, that's great. If not, we can take that burden off of you. You can turn around and say, hey, Webair IMS, what we need is essentially Microsoft Office, this, that, and the other thing. We need all of that on the golden image, and we need it deployed to all of our team members. Not a problem. We'll go ahead and handle that. We'll integrate it with your Active Directory. The most you'll have to give us is a username and password, so we become an administrator of your AD. We then tie it in. We integrate that part. We can integrate the two-factor authentication for you. We set up the URL that your team's going to log into. We really try to make it as minimalistic as possible on your team. And then we'll also, the worst part that your team might have to get involved in is, like I said, either having to deploy that golden image because maybe there's some things that Webair or IMS is not able to get access to. And then number two, maybe we have to set up some very intricate networking between your new VDI infrastructure and then also your home applications. Let's say you have your production servers somewhere else, and we need to create a direct connection from your cloud, your virtual desktop infrastructure to there, so they can connect and access applications. That might be the biggest burden, but it's honestly, if you really look at it, it's probably a couple hours of your team time, and then Webair will take everything over from there. So how do you ensure the protection of our data? And again, these are just some general FAQs, throwing them out there so it has everybody's ideas kicking of what this looks like. Well, obviously, we're also going to back up the infrastructure, right? So we're going to back up the golden images. We're going to back up all the infrastructure that's required to support the solution. And as mentioned, we're going to lock it down. Whether we're locking it down via Active Directory, VPN, maybe your team has to connect to a VPN, then they can get to their desktop. Maybe it's that two-factor authentication. I mean, it really depends, but obviously we ensure that data is protected both from a backup standpoint where we're regularly backing it up, making sure that if anything did happen, we'd be able to recover it. And then of course, we're also integrating with best in breed tools to ensure we're delivering the proper solution and a secure one at that. So we have some power users. What can we do to make sure they can work just as well as on a VDI instances, right? So a lot of us come to think that maybe this desktop in the cloud is not going to work for everybody. I'm a design company, I'm a CAD company, and I'm sure Adam will definitely get more into this once he takes over in just a bit. And this is where Adam briefly brought up the relationship with NVIDIA and GPU-based VDI. And we can also supply that as well, right? So you maybe have your CAD designers who, as you can see in this picture, are maybe designing some type of fan, or maybe you're a construction company and you're building a big tower and you need to have your team work from anywhere. It can support that as well. It's a little bit different of a solution. We do have to install GPUs in the hardware, but it's available. So as long as you know it's available, it doesn't matter if it's a power user, if it's somebody that is just kind of going into Microsoft Office or so on and so forth, we can support it. So let's look at VDI. VDI can reduce your administrative and operating costs up to 70%. What does that mean, right? That's pretty ambiguous. Well, if you look at your IT team, let's just take a hypothetical number and you have 50 employees. Well, you have 50 employees, you have 50 computers. So every time you hire a new employee, somebody has to physically deploy the computer, maybe from an image, set everything up, make sure the monitors are plugged in, so on and so forth. And that doesn't mean you're still not going to have to do that, but now take that and now imagine you hire a new employee and you don't need to worry about deploying all your applications every time you hire somebody. You simply just give them a laptop. Here's your company laptop, and maybe you give them a monitor that they can plug into. Maybe you're a company that needs 2 monitors to work a little bit more efficiently. And now your support team just simply opens up a ticket with support@webair.com and says, please deploy a new VDI instance, call it VDI John. It's a new employee, his name is John. Call it VDI John, not a problem. Within about half hour to an hour, depending on the urgency. And just to give you an idea how quick it can be, now obviously low, medium, high priority support tickets do take priority. But at the end of the day, just giving you an idea that if it was urgent and you needed this, we can have a VDI instance deployed in about an hour after everything's set up. Simply we deploy it. Your employee now gets a username and password that you gave them from AD. And that employee simply now goes on their laptop, they type in a URL to an HTTPS address, and they use the username and password you gave them. And guess what? They're now logged into a desktop, up and running, ready to go. Now look at the operating cost of managing these 50 desktops that you might have today. Now take those 50 desktops and turn them into 50 virtual desktops. You have to patch Windows because Windows came out with a new patch, vulnerable. You patch one image. You simply patch the one golden image, whether Webair and IMS is doing that for you, or if your team wants to go in there and do that, that's okay. We could find a way to make sure everybody's happy with how the solution works. You now patch that image, and now we tell the virtual desktop infrastructure to deploy that to all the new servers, all the new desktops. And when now your employee logs in the next day, they will now be on an up-to-date patch version of the operating system. So there's a lot of things we can really deep dive into and talk about in more detail. But you definitely can see a huge decrease in operational efficiencies from doing this. 70% of businesses see an increase in productivity working remotely. It's very interesting. As I mentioned earlier, Webair has seen the same. If your employees have the ability to easily access their device, they're more likely to say, you know what, I have to get this project done by the end of the day tomorrow. I just don't have time. So, they generally will log on from home and start working. 20% of organizations already use VDI in their IT strategy, so it shows that it's working for many. And the adoption of VDI is expected to grow year over year is 16.5% at an annual growth rate. So that's pretty significant through 2023. So now that 20% of VDI infrastructure in IT strategies already grows significantly. So a majority of this growth we're going to see from small to medium-sized businesses. One of the biggest expenses that companies come to have in really running a business is their office space. So looking at VDI solutions to maybe counteract that, where you might be able to purchase a bunch of laptops for your employees, set up VDI infrastructure, and reduce your rent costs, is going to be pretty significant for small to medium-sized businesses. And then overall, from the management standpoint of a VDI environment, from maybe you have a third-party MSP who's patching your Windows devices, rather than them having to physically come into your office and do that, they might be able to do a majority of that remotely and save significant costs. So really just getting into the Webair IMSCAD relationship, the reason why we're partnering is because Webair has global data centers over the world, and we're an infrastructure provider, and IMS really has the expertise in everything VDI related. So rather than Webair going ahead and just trying to set up a new solution that we might not know exactly what to do, we partner with the best in breed to make sure we deliver the best services to our mutual customers. So it's the perfect set of skills. It's the perfect mix. It's all about the one phone call to call. That's all you have to worry about. Obviously we're talking about Webair and IMS. When you contract with Webair for these services, you have one phone call, one support team to call, and Webair will make sure that anything you need to get done when it comes to your VDI environment, there's one number. You don't need to worry about who do I call for this, who do I have for that. You pay one bill, you pay one invoice, which we'll briefly get into in a minute. So why, again, hosted VDI, single layer control, all about simple management from your desktop's application and management. Save more than 50% of your team's time from deployment, which I briefly went into before. One system to patch, less overhead, less management. Limit the risk of malware and malicious activity from users and desktops. Work from anywhere, work anytime, from a modern desktop or tablet. These tablets these days, you're looking at Microsoft Surfaces, if you're looking at Apple iPads, they all connect to desktops. They're really powerful. A lot of them have 8 gigs of RAM these days, 256 gigs of storage. So to be able to take your iPad anywhere and maybe have another monitor where you can just plug in, and now you're up and running on your iPad, basically like a desktop with a keyboard and mouse. No hardware, no software, no worrying about managing infrastructure anymore. So, and at the end of the day, increased efficiency and decreased cost is what we're really pushing on why these solutions are valuable. Again, one bill, no gotchas, full OpEx model. It's a monthly service. It's very simple. Everything from the infrastructure that's required, to the storage, to the backups, to the VMware licensing, to the Microsoft Windows licensing, everything across the gamut that you need is just one monthly bill. Very simple. No gotchas, no ambiguity. The only thing you'd have to know is, obviously, if you grow and you add more employees, you might incur additional management costs, because the cost is really on a per user basis. So just assume every time you hire an employee, it's going to cost me potentially X more dollars. And that's something that in some sales calls we can get into a deeper detail on. How would I know when I'm going to incur more costs? How would I know when it's going to get more expensive or not? So it all depends. It's very possible that when you do add another employee, it's a very minimal fee. It's possible when you add more employees, it might significantly increase, but all things that can obviously be discussed on what it looks like during a pre-sales call. So it includes, like I said, the compute, switches, storage, firewalls, and of course, they are in a redundant data center. Webair IMS, we strictly work in our cloud environments. Webair is not going to manage your on-premise equipment. Anything in our data centers that you contract from us on an OpEx model will be provided by us, purchased by us. We handle everything. You don't need to worry about purchasing any equipment for our data centers. So we take care of the licensing and VMware as mentioned. And of course, we can also provide additional services such as the patch management that we mentioned, patching that Windows server whenever vulnerabilities come out. making sure that when your users go to log in, they always have a patched environment. So that can be handled by your team, that can be handled by Webair IMS. It completely can be customized. So from there, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Adam, who he's going to go ahead and get into a little bit more detail on desktop as a service VDI, what it is, what IMS offers, some industries that they work in. Outside of the industries they work in, Webair also works in legal, financial, healthcare, and small to medium enterprise. So Adam, I'll go ahead and pass it over to you, and thank you for everybody's time.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, really interesting points you raised there in your discussions there, Michael. And yeah, I think one of the key points that I want to get across to everybody is it's so customizable. Many offerings, particularly in the public cloud, are instance-based. They are a certain amount of resource for a price, but then you've got to go and set it up yourself or have a partner set it up for you. And I think the difference between an instance-based solution and a VDI solution is that customizable environment, and that really does matter to a lot of customers when you talk to them about it and really explain it, because I think what you find is, and although we know everyone probably on this call doesn't work in these sectors that I'm showing now, the reality is it's the same principle. Whether you're in the cloud or not in the cloud, private cloud, I think in this case is what we like to call it. You've all got your specialist needs and you've all got your specialist applications and requirements. And you may have a really great IT team that just doesn't want the burden of managing desktops anymore, but they want to be able to dig deep into the environment, actually manage, do certain administrative tasks. So there's levels of support you can choose. We have 3 levels of support. Whether you want to completely managed and outsourced down to literally second, third line support, which means that you manage the environment. So it's really all about really what you need and how you need it. And obviously, as I explained earlier, from where we came from, this is the sort of industries we've come from, but more and more we're seeing more I would call standard VDI deployments that we're doing. And of course, in those situations, in these sort of spaces, you're getting maybe 30, 40 desktops on a server where now with a standard environment, you can really get 50 upwards on a box if it's right, if it's just resource right. So as I said, the Citrix VMware, of course, is RDP, which is the Microsoft Remote Desktop Protocol, which of course is used widely as well, particularly if you use something like Azure for desktops. But obviously, in this environment with Webair, it's all about, well, what do you need? You may not need Citrix and VMware, okay, as an option. Maybe Hyper-V and RDP would be fine because you just got basic users. So it really just depends on what you want, okay? And because we've got the broad knowledge, because the key with us is we're independent. So we work with Webair as one of our main partners, of course. We work with other partners, around the world, plenty of them as well. So we are that deployment and support model. So we sort of complement their infrastructure by having the expertise in the pre-sales and obviously post-sales support that you'll need. And because we're independent, we don't favour any one vendor or hardware provider or software provider, whatever it may be. So, we can really give you some good, honest advice, and I think that's key. And, we'll call it desktop as a service, VDI. I mean, there's so many different variances of it. Michael talked a lot about the benefits, and I don't need to spend too long on this slide, but, I think there is a big difference between public cloud and a private cloud. And that is really where this sits, in that private cloud mentality. It's physical servers built for you, built to service you only. There's no shared environments. There's no public cloud type instance approach where you're going to have to figure out how to deploy your 50 users on Azure or AWS or whatever it may be, which, believe me, is not an easy thing to do because we're partners with those guys, and it's quite complicated. You need to know what you're doing. So there is a sort of element of stress that's taken out of it by using us. And of course, for us, I think the disaster recovery piece is key. We're seeing, we get a lot of opportunities around, suddenly people realise it's not just about data, it's about people and where they work. And obviously more so now, of course, in the way the world is. And of course, disaster recovery, disaster desktops of recovery is also a serious issue for customers as well. Michael explained about the security aspect, of course, but yeah, the key here is just mobility of your staff, right? Once we're allowed out, of course, because we're not allowed out at the moment, but once we're allowed to move around and do sort of somewhere near normal, you know, as Michael said, it doesn't matter what you can have an old, you know, basic laptop and still have great performance wherever you are on whatever internet connection you're on. And a lot of my messaging at the moment for home workers, particularly home workers, is you know, having that more robust solution for home workers, because everyone sort of was thrown into this really quickly, and of course you know, people scramble around and they're using sort of RDP and VPNs and stuff like that to deliver, you know, and it works fine for the majority of people, but there's always those places, particularly where we play in these industries, where that just doesn't cut it. You really need, you know, a sort of Citrix or VMware environment which delivers a very low bandwidth solution to your end user. And of course, the video grid at the front in the data center really gives you a very rich graphic experience, particularly if you're doing, you know, designing of any sort. You know, and workstations, you know, these guys, they've had workstations under their desks, very powerful workstations under their desks, you know, up to 4 gigahertz processor speeds, and, you know, sort of 64 gig of RAM per desktop and 8 gig of graphical RAM and all this stuff. And it's a lot of resource that basically is not used. And this is where VDI and desktop as a service can really take that away, and, you know, don't go and buy any more expensive hardware. You don't need to. You know, outsource your desktops to us. Don't buy any more. Sweat you what you've already spent your money on a lot longer. And, you know, the endpoint really is becoming less and less significant, or insignificant, I should say. So, you know, it brings a lot of benefits. And, of course, to these graphical, you know, heavy industry markets, it's really key. It really takes, it offers a massive benefit. So, yeah, it's a really important message to get across, is that, you know, not everyone needs graphics at the end of the day, but, you know, even if you're just doing basic desktops, you know, it's about that sort of less stressed outsourced model really works. And this is important because there's so many ways of deploying this, as we've sort of discussed a little bit. You know, a lot of people have done the Windows 10 migration. You haven't yet, but most have, and that was a big driver for this. And then obviously VDI, as Michael, you know, explained, is a dedicated kind of setup for yourself, a private cloud effectively, but you'll find that it delivers a very, very good performance. And that's one of our specializations at IMSCAD. We will just get that absolutely singing for you. Whereas a published desktop, there's another way of deploying. It's not VDI, it's not virtual desktop. Virtual desktop is a dedicated machine per user, dedicated desktop per user. Whereas a published desktop, we can do like a shared environment using something like Horizon View or Citrix XenApp, where it might be an application, just an application, not a desktop. It doesn't have to necessarily be a desktop, Windows 10 desktop. It could be just an application we deliver to. You might have a legacy application that takes a lot of resource, or just sort of running away on a heavy desktop in the corner of the office. You know, these are the sort of things you can now migrate into this sort of environment. It takes away all that pain of having to worry about dealing with it, and you just have it delivered to your users' desktops as an icon. And it's as simple as that, and it's running out of the Webair data center. So it's a really good way of, you know, picking up all that legacy stuff and putting it into the cloud. And then, you know, this is another key aspect, which not many people get into normally when they're doing this sort of thing, or consider, because, excuse me, and normally it's not something you actually worry about, because obviously protocols are obviously what delivers the experience to you from the data center. So, you know, ICA is a Citrix protocol. PC over IP is from a current company called Teradici, which is mainly used in the high-end graphics space. VMware Blast, of course, is VMware's Horizon and Air Blast Extreme for the graphical side. And RDP, which is probably the widest used protocol out there, which is the Windows Microsoft protocol. So, you know, that's something you would use as a basis out of somewhere like Azure. But obviously sometimes, you know, that is not, it's quite a high bandwidth option, and, you know, it's not quite developed as well as some of the Citrix and VMware ones. So we tend to find that it's sometimes a mix, but we tend to find that the ICA or the VMware Blast tends to do it really well. And RDP can be fine for your normal, let's say, Office apps and Office users. So it's just, again, what your workflow is, what's the different mix of your user group. And we obviously can get into that, as Michael said, in the pre-sales stage. And of course, then we build out the environment for you, whether it's Citrix, VMware, maybe it's virtual apps or desktops. So as I said, it may be an application, it may be a desktop. If it's a desktop, it could be a desktop that is used on a shared environment. So you have the whole server resource to run as many desktops as you can on there, which is another way of going about it until the resource runs out. And that's done through XenApp or Horizon View. And then Horizon is obviously the VMware VDI solution. So that's something we tend to favour a lot of the time for, let's say, your normal environments. Because, if you go with one of these guys, Citrix or VMware, you're getting that sort of years of experience of doing this, on-premise originally and then now in the cloud. So they're sort of quite far ahead of certainly Microsoft in how apps can be delivered with real performance and how the protocols have improved massively to also then bring in graphics as well. So there's a lot of advantage to using these types of environments. And believe me, going and doing all this stuff yourself, figuring it out for yourself is not an easy thing to get right. And although, people like your Azures and your AWSs try and make it easy, you've still got to go and set it up and make sure you're managing those costs of that. And the great thing about Webair and IMSCAD is we'll be able to provide you a very predictable cost that does not move unless, you're adding users, for example, or you're asking for specialist stuff. So it's really key that. And, for us, it's always 2019 normally, Windows Server deployments. And again, this just gets more into how we go quite granular on what you do as a business. As I say, some businesses don't need to go this granular, but storage is key. Obviously, you need fast storage normally. And obviously, desktops have their own little bit of storage on them that we provide. But obviously, the back end SAN side of it, you've got this sort of whole issue, and of course, you may have a specialist workflow that only your business knows about or uses that you need to adopt into this environment. So that's something we're specialists in, because we've grown through doing architectural engineering companies, manufacturing companies, where they always got a workflow of some sort in the design workflow to get to an end point. So we're used to sort of getting into the minutiae there and making sure users are happy with what they're getting delivered. Because if you don't have happy users and they're not happy with what you offer here in this sort of environment, you lose them and they won't be very interested in doing it, and you'll get a rebellion. It's quite simple. Thanks, Michael. Of course, network is key, and we go on about this. How much bandwidth you need and all this sort of thing. So it's very difficult. It's very subjective, and no one knows what they've got at home really, unless you really test it and know how to test it. No one knows what you're getting from Starbucks when you're sitting in Starbucks, when you can, of course. And there's all these different issues and sort of factors that come into your performance. But ultimately, the basic stuff. The email, internet will always work, but obviously, it's when you start doing any of your accessing your data, because obviously everything stays centralized in the data center. So all your apps, data, all your general data stores stay in the data center. So all you're doing is accessing there from a remote thing. And obviously, what we see a lot of time is people go to this type of environment and realise, why haven't we done it before? Because our corporate network, really didn't deliver it. And many corporate networks we come across, are just a breaking point, quite frankly, because people just don't, they just get abused and used and expected to do what they want. And of course, this type of outsource model takes the pressure off that side. So suddenly there's a knock-on effect, because other applications and environments you're running will run better because you're removing all the desktop traffic. And, there's a whole sort of knock-on effect there. And, and my view really on this, without getting too much into it, is, now it's the new normal, remote working and home working. Invest in that kind of remoting experience for your users to give them the best possible solution to work at the best optimum, level they can. So, and that's really what it is. And, as Michael mentioned about real estate and cutting down office space and maybe hot desking a bit more and keeping that social distance, of course, so not everyone can go in the office all the time. You need to look at maybe investing in that really robust home working solution, which of course people will just thrown into this, strange situation of everyone going home and working on what they had at that time. And, now's the time, I think, after a few weeks, a few months of this, where actually it's all about getting, because other people use your home broadband, right? So, excuse me. So, it's really important to actually look at this as an opportunity, I think, to give your staff the best possible scenario. As I said, about user groups. So this is a classic one we use a lot in our presentations, and office workers are, again, your Microsoft Office and internet type, maybe in finance, for example, those sort of people. Minimal requirements, maybe a bit of Excel spreadsheet, that type of user. And then you move into more knowledge workers, and all these basically, from knowledge worker to power user, and not many of you, I'm sure, have these power users. Maybe a few of you do, but they obviously need more resource and more sort of as I say, concentration on how we build it for them. But the knowledge worker space where most people sit, and those guys, you really got to get them. They're your breadwinners. They're the ones that are going to go out and actually work hard for you and bring in the money. So to my mind, giving them the best possible option to work effectively is key. And even something like Google Earth, it's a graphical app now. It's very graphical, and not everyone uses it necessarily, but even Excel down to Adobe, these are really key issues. And even Windows 10 as an actual application, really benefits from graphics. You may not want to invest in a graphics card, but I can tell you now that there is a real move to that type of thing, because you can spread a graphics card over a number of users, many users, giving them like a half a gig of graphics RAM and stuff like that, if you wanted to. And believe me, the costs are not ridiculous. They're really not. And it's something worth investigating if you want that really rich experience. Thanks, Michael.
So thanks, Adam. So at the end of the day, the goal was to present everybody with what VDI looks like, and partnering with Webair and IMSCAD. We've been working together for many years at this point. IMS has been in business for over 8 years. Webair is a business over 22 years. We're all about providing the desktops, the applications, where they make sense, how to provide the service, how to tweak the service. It's one thing to deploy and configure something. Everybody knows just about anybody can go ahead and turn on a Windows server or install Windows or install an application, but there's so many different reasons on how you have to do it to get it right. Maybe you have to use PFC-IP or some type of different protocol to speed up the service. Maybe your team doesn't have the bandwidth. Maybe your laptops that you have aren't the best, but you don't want to go out and buy all these new laptops. So maybe we have to tweak the graphics so it's a little bit lower quality. What comes down to setting up VDI is the specialty in both of our services. From Webair on the infrastructure management side, knowing how to deploy the network properly, ensuring that the systems are going to operate effectively and appropriately, and then IMS making sure that they configure the virtual desktop environment to every customer's needs on how it needs to be deployed and tweaked for your business. So you can try to do it on your own. There's no doubt about it. As Adam mentioned several times, his team has experience with Azure and AWS, and his team could actually go ahead and deploy it on Azure and AWS for you, but they've learned from the pain points and the challenges that it's not as simple as it sounds. You might go to their website and it sounds all lovely and fun and easy and simple, and just click this button. It's not that simple. If it was, we wouldn't be able to do what we're able to do for our customers when it comes to virtual desktop. So it's the seasoned technical experts, the 24/7 support, all managed by Webair and IMSCAD. Always somebody to call, no matter what the reason. And at the end of the day, if you're interested in potentially looking at the service or solution, we can absolutely provide you a remote desktop just so you can test it. It won't be integrated with your systems, as we mentioned during an onboarding, but otherwise, at least if you wanted to see the look and feel, how does it feel when I click this button, when I do that, what does it feel like to actually run from a remote desktop? So from now, we're going to go ahead and take a few questions, if there is any. If you want to go ahead and drop a question that you might have in the chat, Adam and I will be more than happy to answer them for you. Just 1 minute, I'm just pulling up some questions here. Okay, so one of the questions is, with the 3 tiers, what can you do for my bring your own laptop scenario? I have 30 CCU Enterprise Horizon 7 licenses, and users are covered by M365 E3 virtual desktop licensing included. My goal is to have help desks direct, but not manage desktop golden images within Windows 10 Enterprise. Adam, do you want to take that question?
Oh, I'd be happy to. Is there? Can you say it again? It was quite a lot of information there.
Yes. So with the 3 tiers, what can you do for me in my bring your own laptop scenario? I have 30 CCU Enterprise Horizon 7 licenses, and users are covered by Microsoft O365 E3 virtual desktop licensing included. My goal is to have help desks direct but not manage desktop and golden images with Windows 10 Enterprise.
Wow, okay. I think that's probably one we'll have to take offline. But nonetheless, it's certainly doable. I mean, in principle, there's no reason why you can't. I mean, you've got 30 concurrent Horizon users there. We can certainly look at how we can bring that into a server environment with us. And then, yeah, we provide 3 levels of support. So, you know, as you rightly said, if you don't want to manage the images and stuff like that and the apps necessarily, we can do all that for you. You'd be at our kind of silver level, which is our mid-level offering. So we could obviously give you the information. We have a full SLA, you know, we can provide you. So again, you know, it's probably worth a follow-on conversation with that customer.
Great, thank you, Larry, for that question. We also have we have 2 questions, one from Spencer, one from Larry, that kind of intermingle. Larry said about bringing your own licenses, and then Spencer also said, how does the O365 licensing work? So Adam, I'll let you kind of take that, since it's kind of, can they bring their own licenses? What's that look like to bring your own licenses? And also, how does the Office 365 licensing work if you were to have that?
Well, the Office 365 licensing doesn't really change. There's no issue there. I mean, it is a bring your own license model. We can provide obviously Windows. We'll provide Windows Server. We'll provide VMware Citrix, Windows 10 if you need it. But ultimately, really, you know, what we ask clients to do is just, you know, what have you got now? You want to move it into the cloud, have it managed. We'll just take it as it is. You know, we regularly are deploying. Yeah, the great thing is about a lot of these software vendors, we can actually do trial licensing for up to about 3 months. So, you know, you've got plenty of time to move and migrate once it's started. So, you know, from my point of view, there's not an issue with any of that. Again, you know, it's probably another conversation we can have with that customer more, you know, offline.
Great, thank you. And it looks like the last question we have is, we have an on-prem GP 2016 server. Can it be utilized with VDI? I mean, from the standpoint of what we provide, you know, any of the infrastructure would be provided from Webair. So we don't manage customers' infrastructure. We don't install VDI on top of their own servers. It would have to be infrastructure that's all provided by Webair. So that server, I would assume, probably wouldn't be used too much. But otherwise, you know, just to give you a good idea, any of the infrastructure provided for virtual desktop infrastructure is going to be provided by Webair at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, yeah, again, we could maybe help them, but, you know, ultimately it wouldn't be a Webair, it would be a Webair infrastructure. But I mean, obviously, yeah, I mean, absolutely, it's one of those things. I mean, if you've got you know, I mean, I would encourage customers to really look at getting some pricing from us, because I think you'll be quite surprised. You know, it really isn't as expensive as you may think to move that, and that old server you've got there, yeah, you can repurpose to do something else.
Great, and I think we have one more question, and Adam, I'll let you take this. The question is,
there's a lot for me here, isn't there?
Yeah, they like you.
They're working me hard. All right.
Does Horizon 8 look to make VDI more simpler?
Yeah. There's a one-word answer. Yes. No, yeah, it's a great product, Horizon. It really is. It's really developed. I mean, when we first got Horizon, you know, as a real option in the VDI space, which is probably about 3.5 years ago now, because it was always Citrix before then. We were very, experienced in Citrix, but VMware really came up strong on the rails with their Horizon products. They've always been, number one for server virtualization, but with the now doing this, and of course then they got into the graphics space as well with NVIDIA Grid, and of course Citrix has always been a kind of a front runner with that type of thing, but they've really, really improved the product, and more and more I see it. Being originally a Citrix type, I suppose favouring Citrix, let's say, I've got to say, I think it's very much on par, and it's a very good product, and I think even Horizon 8 will be even better, and and improve again, and it is a lot simpler, and their whole ethos is to make things as simple as possible. Most people have a VMware, virtual environment, right? So it seems natural to take Horizon on as your desktop as a service or your VDI solution. So it's going to be good, I think. Yeah.
Great. So Adam, thank you for those answers, and thank you everybody for today's webinar. You see our information below. You can contact either of us regardless of what you're looking for. This is a mutual webinar that we wanted to put together to really explain VDI solutions. So sales@webair.com. We'll get you right to our team. Info on IMSCAD would do the same. So thank you everybody for attending. I hope everybody stays safe out there, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.